Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily interview show about the United States. Hello, everybody. We've had some strange people on the show in the past, but we've never had a memory champion. And indeed, my guest today is not only a memory champion, he is a 6-time USA memory champion. So he's a bit of a genius. And he's also the author of a new book called, appropriately enough, Everyday Genius. Nelson Dellis teaches computer science at Skidmore College, and he's joining us from upstate New York, where he lives. Nelson, what does it mean to be a memory genius or a memory champion? What do you have to do?
That's a great question. Not a lot of people know even that there are memory competitions, but basically to win the U.S. Memory Championship, it's a full-day event of memorizing all sorts of arguably useless information, numbers, playing cards, random unpublished poems, names and faces, lists of words, things like that. And whoever can memorize the most in the given time, the most accurately, at the end of the day ends up being the U.S. memory champion.
As I said, your new book is called Everyday Genius, but are memory champions geniuses?
Right. I would say, I don't think I am a genius, but I have been labeled that because of some memory feats that I've shown people who don't know what I'm actually doing in my mind. I think it's more of like a technique and a trick, if you will, but the fact remains that I can remember the thing, that I'm being tested on. So it actually is a genius memory, an exhibit of genius memory. So, but I don't necessarily think that you have to be have an amazing memory to be a genius. I think genius can come in all sorts of sizes. It's a very subjective term, honestly. And I think that's what I tried to get to the heart of in the book, that anybody can be a genius and anyone can exhibit genius seeming skills. A lot of them can be learned and trained, just like my memory was.
It sounds like soccer, American soccer for kids. Everyone gets a medal. Isn't the whole point of being a genius is they're exceptional? There was only one Einstein. So if everyone's a genius, then they're no longer geniuses.
Good point. Yeah. And the question is, like, why is Einstein a genius? Why is anybody that anybody says is a genius a genius? I think there are clear geniuses out there. Of course, these exceptional people with incredible intellect, creative geniuses, Steve Jobs, right? Who came up with ideas that nobody else was coming up with. But they all have some level of genius, different abilities in different forms. But I think they're all things that we can tap into. And that's what I want to get to the heart of in this book, is that with a bit of practice, with a bit of direction, we can all catch glimpses of that. And depending how far you want to go, I think a lot of it can be trained.
I've always had a bit of and I'm certainly not an expert on this. If anything, I'm the opposite of a genius, an idiot. But I've always had a bit of a zero-sum theory on our brain and what we have in it. And the less we have, the better, Nelson. So I'm not sure whether stuffing your mind with all these memories is necessarily a good thing.
I see what you're saying. And us memory competitors, when we're memorizing thousands of things, especially pointless things, yes, like what's the point there? But that's for the competitors' sake. You have to have the interest to compete for that to be meaningful to you. I don't necessarily suggest that everything needs to be remembered. And I agree with you that, for things to be memorable, you need to have everything can't be remembered. Otherwise, nothing special, nothing sticks out. But I think what's helpful is to have the techniques to have a better control of this thing that lives inside of our skull, right? Which I feel like a lot of people, especially memory is a great example, they feel like they don't have any control over memory, that they just have a bad memory, that things they want to hold on to slip away. Things that they don't mean to hold on to stay, and they don't know why or how to have a better handle on that. And memory techniques is a way into that world where you can suddenly feel like you actually are in the driver's seat of your own memory. That you can pick and choose if you'd like, what you'd like to stay there, and for how long. I think that's really what it's about. It's not necessarily about let me stuff everything I possibly can in there, but perhaps store the things that are meaningful to you and not forget them or lose them.
Yeah, I'm a world champion in forgetting. You've talked about this thing that living in our skull, our brains. We've done lots of shows on brains and very few on memory. But people have often suggested that the brain is the most complicated thing that they've seen, at least in the universe. And most brain scientists don't understand it. Is that your quote unquote understanding, Nelson, that the brain is too complex for us to understand?
I definitely think it is this machine in our mind that is so complex, and I don't know if we'll get to a point where we fully understand it. I mean, even if, and I'm not a neuroscientist, not a doctor. So when I talk about memory, I talk about it from the practical standpoint and actually how to use it and what actually works from a practical standpoint. Um, but I've had experiences that perhaps kind of defy what a scientist might describe is possible or happening in the mind when it comes to memory, at least. And I dive into some other really interesting cognitive abilities in the book that defy all explanation. And I don't know if scientists could even begin to explain it currently or ever. But yeah, it's definitely a mystery. I don't know if it's something that we can figure out fully.
Our brains may be mystical objects. How did you get into this whole memory thing? How did you start competing at the national level? My understanding is that happened after experiencing or watching your grandmother's struggle with Alzheimer's.
That's right. My grandmother on my father's side was the only grandmother I knew. She developed Alzheimer's near the end of her life, and I never lost anybody close to me. And so when she passed away, it really impacted me. And even watching her decline, it was a painful and difficult, but also awe-inspiring thing to watch. That just to see how the mind is capable of becoming a shell of itself. In some cases, she couldn't remember me, and that was just wild to see. And so, anyways, that led me down a rabbit hole to study memory and just read about it. I'd never heard of a memory competition. I didn't think that I would ever find myself in one, let alone win one. And picked up a former memory champions audiobook with some practical techniques. And I tried a few of them. They worked, and I was hooked. I wanted to further unlock this super power that I suddenly realized was in me, and that is in all of us, apparently. And the rest is kind of history. I didn't want to go down any other road at that point. I was hell bent on maximizing my memory so that the same thing would never happen to me. That was my hope, right? Is why I was spending so much time with this, was to strengthen my own mind.
It's interesting. We've done some shows on Alzheimer's. Again, it's not really a hard science show, but it's a very important and interesting subject and becoming more and more prominent as people live older and older. What's your understanding of Alzheimer's? I mean, maybe you didn't know it back then when your grandmother got it, but what's your understanding of what Alzheimer's is, how we get it, and why becoming what you call an everyday genius, in other words, doing this exercise with your brain, can actually offset Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of unclear what is the cause of Alzheimer's and what are the kind of lifestyle, environmental factors that play into those who get it, those who don't, those who get early onset. There seems to be some kind of genetic component to the early onset, but it seems increasingly more so that there is an environmental player in this disease. The kind of foods you eat, the stress in your life, the amount of sleep through
The podcast you
years.
appear on, Nelson.
I'm sorry?
The podcasts you appear on.
What do you mean?
Oh, that was a joke.
Oh, sorry. Over my head, but okay. But yes, it's
not a genius joke, I'm afraid.
No, I guess that part I do not have. No, I usually can catch a joke, but that one, yeah, I got it now. But yeah, ultimately, what you do in your life potentially could cause you to go down that road. What it looks like, though, is that keeping your mind active plays a big part in that as well. There was a study done on these British cab drivers where British cab drivers have to study for the knowledge. It's called the test, where they have to study the London maps, right? And those who were studying this intense examination, their hippocampus, part of the brain that is involved with memory, grew in size. And those who weren't studying for it remained the same. And there's also some research out there that says that those who have larger than average hippocampi tend to not get Alzheimer's later in life. And so there is something about training the brain and working on kind of building those mental muscles that can help strengthen it against something like this. Do I know that for sure? Maybe I'm still destined to get Alzheimer's, but I have to think that the strengthening that I've done for my brain, the techniques and the tools and the habits that I've built, a lot of these memory techniques, I do them almost intuitively because I've trained them so much that if I were to, if I was at an age where I was supposed to get Alzheimer's, but now there's this memory champion version at that age, I have to think that my techniques and skills would at least push that out. Who knows, maybe months, maybe even years. Maybe I never get it. I don't know. But I'd have to think that it would help.
Yeah, I certainly don't. I hope you won't get Alzheimer's. I certainly hope I won't either. But in all this culture of longevity, as people live longer and longer, and some people claim that we can live to 150 or 200, and I know that you're not an expert on Alzheimer's, and I take your point, and we're going to get into some of the mental gymnastics to keep your mind active. But is there a certain point where the mind or the brain gets out of warranty, that it's been designed over hundreds of thousands, millions of years to last whatever it is, 70, 80, 90 years? And we can't really extend it. It's rather like expecting our iPhones to last 25 years.
True. I feel like I'm on board with you there, but I feel like if you have a better trained mind, better skilled mind, that maybe those 80 some years are equally as mentally spunky and alive, right? Perhaps there's less of a decline over those years, and you can stay sharper for longer. With memory techniques that I teach, it's one of these things that I've worked with all sorts of ages, from as young as 5 years old. I teach my kids these techniques to I'm currently working with a 90-year-old, and they can all do the same thing. Maybe not at the start, but when I teach them these techniques, all our brains are wired to work like this. And with a bit of practice, they can do some pretty impressive things that, say, most 5-year-olds or 90-year-olds cannot do otherwise. So I don't know. It speaks a lot to what our brains are capable of. And of course, age matters, right? We slow down as we age, but I think there's still a lot of room to maximize our brain's potential, even in later years.
Tell me a bit more about this USA Memory Championship. How many people entered? Was it on television? Were there prizes? Were there judges? How was it determined? You won it 6 times. Did you win it 6 times in a row?
All great questions. I did not win them all in a row. There was 2011, 2012. We don't talk about 2013. I made a mistake in the finals. But then I won 2014 and 2015. So back-to-back years there with a gap. And then I took a break and then I came back trying to win my 5th title. It took a few years, but I got it in 2021. I retired and then I came back for another round and won it in 2024. The competition itself has ranged up and down with popularity. As you can imagine, it's not the most attractive sounding thing. Who wants to go memorize things all day? But it is super fun, in my opinion. But there's been years where it's been very quiet, maybe 50 competitors. There's been other years where we had over 100, and it was televised, and they did a whole special on it for the Discovery Channel. I think there was even a couple of years before I competed where it was broadcast live, like a sporting event, on one of Mark Cuban's cable channels back in the day. Right now, the last few years, it's been streamed on YouTube from just to reach as many people as possible. So it's interesting. And sometimes there's spectators, sometimes there's not many. Maybe it really depends. And I think in general, when people watch a memory competition, I think people are just fascinated by the potential of the mind. It may not be the most exciting thing to watch, although they do a good job of making it kind of suspenseful, and there's some kind of on stage events that are fun to watch, but it's more about just like seeing what humans can do with their own minds.
Yeah, is it? And I guess in a sense, it's like a quiz. I mean, it's like the spelling bee or something like that, is it?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's here's some information, memorize it, and regurgitate it back out.
So what kind? So tell me the kind of information that you require for these memory championships. Do they give you a phone book? I don't know if you even know if phone books still exist, but what they do, give you some huge book that you're supposed to memorize?
Yeah, so there's different events. There's one for numbers. So they give you 5 minutes and a single sheet of 500 digits. So just rows and rows and rows of numbers. And you have to memorize as many of them as you can in the time frame. And then recall them out. You write them by hand afterwards. Then you memorize a deck of cards. So shuffle deck of cards, memorize it as fast as you can. Some people do it in just under 12 seconds now, which is insane to know all that information backwards and forwards. Then they memorize names and faces. So they'll print out a packet of headshots with first and last names, just random people you've never seen before. And you have to memorize those names in 15 minutes, as many as you can. Then they give you a poem, same idea. It's previously unpublished, so you've never heard it before. And you have 15 minutes to memorize the text in front of you, punctuation and capitalization, all that stuff. And then the top 8 to 12, it depends on the year. Sometimes they've changed the rules sometimes. Those top competitors advance to an afternoon round of on-stage playoff kind of elimination rounds where they memorize words. There's an event called Tea Party where some audience members come on stage and say, my name is so-and-so, I was born this date, my phone number is such and such, here are my hobbies, all sorts of information, and you have to remember all of the people. And then the final event is it's whittled down to 3 competitors at that point. They have to memorize 2 packs of playing cards, 104 cards, and they go one by one reciting those cards, and whoever makes mistakes is eliminated, and the last man or female standing is the champ.
I'm sure you're familiar with Joshua Foer's book on memory. In fact, it was a bestseller, Moonwalking with Einstein, about his year-long journey into the world of competitive memory. Did you ever come across Foer? Did you ever compete against him?
Yeah, he was. I didn't compete against him. He was in 2005, 2006. 2006, I believe that was the year he won. I didn't show up until 2009 and 2010, and then 2011 was my first win. But the fun thing about his book is it came out the week I won my first championship in 2011. And he was at the event kind of promoting his book. And so we got to chat, and he's a super nice guy. We've kept in touch over the years. And at that time, he was doing little book tours in the area. And he told me straight up, he said, Nelson, I don't do this stuff anymore. Like, I don't do the memory training anymore. So if you wanted to pop in to any of my things, I was living in Boston at the time, and he had an event. So I showed up there, and he made me do all the memory demos. And I think we did another one in Miami where I lived a bit later. But he's a good friend of mine. He's a nice guy.
But his book is more sort of cultural or investigative journalism. Yours is more of a self-help book. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's totally fair. It's really practical tips: how to do this, how to do that, how to get better at this, some advice to figure this out and navigate this component of a genius ability. And I do tap into some, little side stories about some famous or historically famous geniuses in history.
Who are your favorite when
My
it comes to
absolute
geniuses? Who are unusual geniuses or special geniuses rather than everyday geniuses?
Yeah, I guess those ones are all very special geniuses. I'm a big fan of Richard Feynman. I grew up
The physicist.
a physicist. I studied physics, and it is in large part from listening to some of his lectures. Not that I understood them at the time, but his Feynman lectures are such a masterclass in how he could teach. And to me, I've always wanted to teach and share ideas with people, and he did it so effectively with the most complicated matter, uh, teaching statistical mechanics, quantum dynamics. Um, he would just explain through metaphor and make it so understandable. And he had a way with words there, and that's, I think, in part a true sign of someone with great intellect is someone who can explain the most complicated things to someone who doesn't necessarily understand, or hasn't understood it yet.
Nelson, some of the stuff I've read on Alzheimer's and other degenerative diseases of the mind suggests that a lot of the causes are solitariness, that if we could be more social, if we could talk to other people, then our minds would be healthier. Is the advice you give in Everyday Genius, is it a solitary kind of mental training, or should we be sitting with others? Does that help us in terms of maintaining our intellectual, what you call our mental spunkiness?
Yeah, it's for that. I'm on board with you. I even had a chapter in the book talking about social genius, because you can think of a genius, someone who's super smart, but maybe a bit awkward and quiet and tends to themselves and just lives in their own mind. But I think if you can really be broad in terms of your cognitive ability, that social interactions and being able to navigate that kind of genius is super important and can't be overlooked. So I have a whole chapter on how to converse and how to storytell and how to interact with others so that you can become memorable, and how others might see you as someone who's socially genius, someone who's great with people. I'm not necessarily that person, but I've had to learn over the years, obviously, because I'm very audience facing because of what I do now. But that wasn't something that I was born with. It's something that I had to work on as well. I'm a very shy guy at heart. But I think it's super important to be able to interact with others. I think we all recognize that going through those periods of solitude in COVID times where we didn't interact with people. And if we did, it was across a screen, right? And how damaging that was to a lot of our mental states. I always argue in my presentations about memory improvement that there's really 4 pillars of brain health. One is training or exercising your mind, keeping your mind active in some capacity. Physical fitness, right? You want to keep your body healthy and fit. That pumps blood to your brain, right? Which you need. Diet, what you eat and feed. But then the last one is kind of a one that's turns a lot of heads, which is social interaction. And I think keeping interactions with people around you and having conversations and things that stimulate you both positively and negatively by interacting with others is a huge part of keeping your mind active. Even the argument for Alzheimer's sake, if you were to develop Alzheimer's and you have a strong network of people that are on your team, that's what you would need to stay, alive, honestly, for longer. If you don't have those connections, who's going to help you, right?
I've always heard, Nelson, maybe this is again a bit of an old wives' tale, so to speak, that blueberries are good in terms of your memory. If you eat a lot of you mentioned that the third pillar of your argument for everyday genius is eating correctly. You've got to exercise. You've got to be social. Um, should we eat a lot of blueberries, or what other sorts of foods help you? What did you train on before you won your USA memory championship? You're a 6-time winner. Did you eat a lot of blueberries?
I did. I love blueberries, mostly
They're
for that
really
fact.
good, aren't they?
They're delicious, yeah. And they're a super powerful antioxidant. That's mainly the benefit there, that it can reduce inflammation in the body and the mind. I feel
I
like
just ate some before this conversation. I think that's why I'm
perfect.
vaguely coherent still.
Yeah. No, in the early years when I was really, I had no other commitments. This was all I did is memorize and train for these competitions. I even had turned my business into this. I was a brand ambassador for some companies that were sponsoring me to train. Right. I felt like I was living a true athlete, mental athlete lifestyle, so I could focus on all these things. And I didn't drink. 6 months before, not that I drink a lot, but no drops of alcohol before competition, 6 months before. I had a lot of foods that were brain enhancing. One of the main ones that I fed my brain was DHA omega-3, which is a fatty acid found naturally in the brain. And I would take a lot of supplements. There's a lot of research on the benefits of DHA omega-3 for memory.
Is that a fish connected product, or am I?
Yeah. I mean, it's not the only source, but you can. It's commonly received from, say, fish oil. A lot of people take fish oil as a supplement, and you can often find, if you look at the labeling, that's DHA omega-3 or some kind of DHA. There are different kinds, but DHA omega-3 is kind of the most beneficial. But yeah, there's other sources of that. There's even foods infused with DHA omega-3.
Was there ever a fishy smell at this championship with people?
I don't know. I can't speak for other competitors what they were doping, quote unquote, themselves up with. But maybe a couple burps here and there. You smelled some fish. I don't know.
The forebook Moonwalking with Einstein touches on the sort of the freakiness of this, and I think he was sort of half amused, half horrified with the way in which he was treated as a kind of freak by some people for winning these competitions and spending hours and days and months training his mind to learn stuff that hadn't got any value apart from winning these competitions. Did you ever get concerned about being sort of treated like a freak, as a kind of 21st century version of a 19th century circus performer?
I wouldn't say I haven't had that experience where I was treated like a freak. Definitely the circus performer. I've had a lot of my close friends, call me over when we're out together and be like, "Nelson, can you memorize this girl's phone number for me, or memorize the credit card number?"
That's dangerous, because then you call her yourself.
Yeah, I'm a good wingman. I'll put it like that. But no, it never anything where they were like, "Oh my God, this is some sorcery. This is witchcraft. You're a freak." Always positive. Oftentimes people are quick to say, "You may be able to do that. I can't," and they like to kind of categorize you as some kind of anomaly, even though my whole business is based on teaching people how to do this, and everybody can do it. I just feel like a lot of people, if I tell you this is possible and that you can do what I can do, now you don't have an excuse, right? It's funny because one of the events I did with Josh Foer, if you remember the book, there was a chapter or two on a person named Daniel Tammet. Do you remember that?
No, but I have read the book. But anyway,
yeah, it was tucked away. You may have not remembered. It wasn't the focus, but he had Asperger's. He even had a Discovery Channel special on him, and in the episode, they have him do mental calculations really fast. They have him learn Icelandic and go on live TV, and just learning it in a week. And Josh talks about him because he claims that he can just visualize numbers. It's just natural to him. And it turns out that he was a former memory competition competitor with a different name, and he had a whole memory business. He was a memory coach, so he's aware of memory techniques, and he was teaching memory techniques. So the question is, was he actually telling the truth there? Was he using his memory naturally, or actually using some of the tricks that we use? And Joshua 4 kind of presses on that. Anyways, we did an event, and somebody showed up, and during the Q&A kind of drilled him about that. And he said, "What did you have against Daniel Tammet?" And he was so angry that Josh had written about him in that way. And it occurred to me that, it's I think it's much easier to believe that there are people out there, maybe these isolated anomalies, these geniuses, and that it's unattainable, right? Versus anybody can do this. And now it opens the door that you are the responsible person in this, if you want to have it or not, right? And I've had that experience a lot, where people are quicker to say, "Oh, Nelson can do this because he's that, and I'm not that." That's the closest maybe to freak I've experienced.
Not that I'm accusing you, Nelson, of course, of being a freak. One person who is pretty freaky is Elon Musk. We did a show about him a few days ago. And there certainly seems to be something, and someone wrote a book about him suggesting he was, for better or worse, on the spectrum, that there was an element of autism about him. Do memory champions does being on, we tend to be, just as we're obsessed with Alzheimer's these days, we're also obsessed with the spectrum. Is there a connection between memory and being on the spectrum, both in terms of maybe having a good or a bad memory, or are they separate things?
I don't necessarily see a correlation. And if you survey the lists of competitors over the years, the top competitors, me included, versus the people who just come to see what's going on and don't do very well, I've never seen anybody that I would have labeled on the spectrum. Not that I necessarily have a radar for that, but usually you can tell someone's a bit awkward and thinking differently. But I've never seen that. Everybody who competes in these competitions, and the top people who win these competitions even, seem pretty normal to me. Other than we like to spend hours of our time a day training this stuff. But I don't know. I don't know if that's for me to make that call, if somebody's, different than someone else. I like to think that I'm somewhat normal, but also I like to feel that I'm unique, right? That I did something that not many people have done, which is train my ass off for a kind of quirky event.
Well, train your mind off. How about your eyes?
That's right. Yeah. I did. There's a lot of sitting on your ass, though.
Yeah, I can imagine. You probably have to go to the gym a lot as well, both literally and metaphorically. You teach computer science now at Skidmore, so you're all too familiar with the benefits and probably some of the problems associated with digital technology. Again, you don't need me to tell you this. There's a great debate going on these days about the social, cultural, intellectual benefits of the digital revolution. You mentioned phone numbers. When I was growing up, I could remember everyone's phone number. Now I don't even know my wife's. I barely know my own. When it comes to map reading, for example, we used to know how to read maps. Now we just rely on our iPhone. We don't even have to think about these things. Is the digital revolution, is it contributing, I wouldn't say necessarily to Alzheimer's, but to poor mental health? Should we still remember people's phone numbers, even if they're stored in our iPhone? Should we still know how to read a map?
Yeah, I think it's playing a part in the decline of our capabilities, our mental capabilities. And yeah, I was more on the last few years of that phone number memorizing revolution. I had to do it, but not for very long, until cell phones came along. And you could argue, like, well, what's the point of memorizing phone numbers if they're all in this device? But sure, I mean, there could be a day where everything shuts off and you have no access to that, in a doomsday scenario. But what are the chances of that, right?
Yeah, it's not so much that they could be valuable. It's just that we switch our minds off. We outsource our minds to our iPhones.
We outsource our minds to these tech, right? So we don't have to do the heavy lifting anymore. And so our minds, wherever it's being replaced, is atrophying, right? Memory is a great example. We don't have to remember really much anymore because it's just a couple taps of our phone away. If we want the answer, we don't have to think about it. If we want a number, we don't have to think about it. It's right there. We can even now say, to our AI assistant, hey, call this person, and it'll do it for us, right? But I argue that there's two things happening here. One is our brains are atrophying, and who knows what that will look like as the years pass by and this gets more intense to our brain health. If there's going to be a rapid increase of cases of Alzheimer's or other things that we're not aware of, who knows what the long-term effect is. But I think people are starting to feel the effects of relying on these tools more and more. People are struggling to be able to focus. People are struggling to even craft an email on their own because they've had AI tools do it for them, right? And yes, maybe they're being more productive. Maybe they're getting a lot more business in, but at what cost, right? Maybe your brain health is going down the tube, right? Faster than we can anticipate. The other side of it is just this element of having your own cognitive agency, right? Like having control of your own mind and this human aspect of it all. If we're outsourcing that, like what is left, right? Like if we're not being our own creative selves or using our own memories, using our problem-solving abilities, then what are we doing, right? Now, I think there needs to be at least now we have the choice where we can decide to use AI tools or tech tools, whatever, and to what extent we can use them. But that might not be our choice down the road, right? We may not have a choice at all. But for now, we can. So what I suggest is, I'm all for like au naturel, right? Like using your own intellect before anything. So I do memorize phone numbers. I always memorize phone numbers first. I'll eventually put them in my phone, but I always make it a challenge for me to actually memorize the number and hold it for at least 24 hours before I put it in my phone, right? I have the techniques and the tools to do that, to know that I won't lose it until then. But that's something I trained, right? I try to remember everybody's name that I meet. I try to think about a problem before I now ask a tool for help. I try to be creative on my own before I try to get some inspiration from some tool. So I always think that there's some, and this is just me because I don't like the idea of losing out to a machine because I feel like I'm losing a part of myself in the process of that. So yeah,
it's an interesting observation, especially someone who is teaching computer science as well. I mean, the AI element is obviously it's more than on the horizon. It's at the door. It's maybe inside our doors now. AI already beats humans at chess, at Go. As a memory genius, did you ever compete with AI? Were there ever memory competitions where humans went up against machines, or is that absurd comparison because machines remember everything?
Yeah, no, that hasn't happened yet. I will say where it has kind of bumped head with a lot of us memory athletes who do teach this is, you can ask a lot of AI tools to create mnemonics for you, right? So you, as the person trying to come up with your own mnemonics, can save a lot of time, right? You don't have to come up with them. But AI still is absolutely terrible at coming up with things that are actually memorable. In my opinion, I haven't seen anything.
I mean, we even have a word for that, AI slot, which is by definition forgettable.
Yeah, right. There's just something about it that feels dead inside and lacks that element of human creativity. And who knows? I mean, that could very well be fixed, and it might be impossible to tell the difference one day. But I don't think so. That's my personal stance on that. So, yeah,
it's all about remaining human. I think your everyday genius might be renamed everyday human. You've been
perhaps
very good natured with my rather obnoxious questions, Nelson. So let's end with a couple of hacks. Your book is full of what at least your publisher calls hacks. I'm always a bit wary of that word, to boost your memory, focus, problem solving, and much more. Maybe you can come up with a couple of doable hacks that our audience can use. Everyone needs to, of course, buy your book. It's already, you'll be pleased to know, it's the #1 release in memory improvement self-help on Amazon. I'm not sure how much competition you have in that area, but
I didn't know that, so that's great.
so you're a bestseller already. You're the top of the charts, but perhaps you might come up with a couple of hacks that anyone can do, even an idiot like myself.
Sure. Yeah. I start the book off with some kind of fundamentals, which have to do, in my opinion, with memory, reading, focus and attention, and learning deeper and learning for the long term. So I'll give you your audience a really helpful tip on how to remember any name of any person you meet. I think that's a very practical, useful tool. And the way to approach that, and I dive into the basics of how to memorize anything in the book, but ultimately it's, you got to come up with a picture to represent the information.
Is this the memory palace idea that I know Joshua Foer wrote about in his book?
The concept is in there. It's not specifically that, but the same principle, and you'll see why in a moment. But you have this information, the name, which you might want to turn into something more memorable. So usually when you meet someone, they'll tell you their name. Try to associate it to something that you know with that name, right? So if Nelson is an example, you might think Nelson Mandela. You might think Willie Nelson.
Or Admiral Nelson.
Admiral Nelson for the Brits out there.
I actually saw Willie Nelson last year. He's 91 and he looks in very fine mental health.
There you go. Yeah. And then, so once you have a picture, then it's about what do I do with it? How do I store it somewhere so that it's easier to retrieve in the future, right? Because that's often the problem, especially with names. You're like, I know this person's name, and it just isn't coming, right? Like you don't know how to actively find it in this mess of a mind that we typically have. But what if you had a way to organize those pictures, right? And so the memory palace is an idea of how to structure that information, those pictures. Now with a name though, the best way to do it is to anchor it to the person themselves. So typically what I'll suggest is to choose a physical feature of the person's face, since you're looking at them in the face when you meet them.
Yeah, so give an example of myself. How are you going to do that with me?
I'll use myself because I never like to do it for.
No, I don't mind. I won't take it personally.
All right. Okay. So if we were to choose a feature on you, all right, I would go with your kind of poofy gray hair. All right.
That's Nelson, now you've insulted me. Poofy gray hair. I'm going to tell my wife about that. Anyway, go on.
Is that okay?
That's fine. You can have that one.
All right. And so then the next thing is you want to come up with a picture for the name. So a lot of the names that I encounter are very common names. Andrew is definitely one of those. I have images that I go to straight away, right? So for Andrew, I just picture somebody drawing something because the word drew, past tense of draw.
Yes.
Okay. And again, this is just automatic at this point because I have a lot of these in my database just set up. But you might think of, I don't know, I can't think of anybody famous with Andrew. Well, there's a basketball player.
Prince Andrew.
Oh, Prince. Yeah. Okay.
Who, of course, was named after me. He was born about 17 days later. And I certainly have more hair than he does. And more of a life, I think, these days.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you could picture him, or you could picture this.
Although I don't think any of us would really want to picture him, certainly before a meal or something.
No, I don't think so. But anyways, now the goal is whatever your picture is, you attach it or imagine it interacting with the feature in some memorable way, over the top, silly, absurd, exaggerated, grotesque. All these kinds of things are the things we remember, right? So I might imagine drawing, your hair in some kind of bizarre.
My poofy gray hair you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The feature that I chose. Right. And, maybe.
Although not everyone, Nelson, would agree it's gray. Some people might think it's dark.
That's true. But that's, in my mind, I'm doing this process and this is how I interpret it.
You certainly have less gray hair than me. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know for how much longer, but anyway, so the idea
is this interview, right?
I'm sorry?
Especially after this interview.
No. You're good. But anyway, so this process, right? So the next time I would see you, I'd notice this kind of similar feature, and then I'd see the image if I made it memorable enough, kind of attached in my third eye, my mental vision there, and that would help me remember the name. Um, the crazier you can make the image or the connection, the more likely it is to stick.
Well,
And so,
there you have it. You're going to remember me next time you come on the show. I'm sure you've written a number of books. I'm sure there'll be some more books. The new book
yeah,
is called Everyday Genius: Hacks to Boost Your Memory, Focus, Problem Solving, and much more by Nelson Dellis, the 6-time USA memory champion, and many other things. Very interesting conversation. Nelson, I remember your name because of Admiral Nelson. And I'm going to go and eat some blueberries now to improve my mind. Thank you so much.
thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Hi, this is Andrew again. Thank you so much for listening or watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the platforms. And I'd be very curious as to your comments as well on what you think of the show, how it can be improved, and the kinds of guests that you would enjoy hearing or listening to in future. Thank you again.